I'm not a big fan of collabs, don't get me wrong, I understand the excitement and the appeal behind them. Seeing characters from a completely different story suddenly appear as playable characters in a game you already enjoy is obviously something fun. Still, most of the time they feel forced, immersion breaking, and honestly more like marketing than storytelling. That's why when Wuthering Waves announced the Edgerunner collab, I expected to feel exactly the same way. But after seeing that preview, I have to say I am pleasantly surprised to be proven wrong. Somehow, against all expectations, this actually feels like it could work. You see, the thing about collabs is that they are an amalgamation of untapped potential, and I mean every aspect of it. Obviously, the first thing that comes to mind is the storytelling itself. Starting from the very beginning, the concept of bringing characters from one world into another should already be something incredibly interesting on its own. Any concept capable of doing something like that should naturally create fascinating storytelling possibilities, and more importantly, the story itself should treat it as something huge. But most of the time, it's barely more than an afterthought. Usually, it's just a plot device to move a character from one setting into another, and that's about it. That's already a massive letdown. To have a concept with this much potential and not fully capitalize on it, calling it a waste almost feels like an understatement. Then we move on to the characters themselves, because obviously, suddenly finding yourself in an entirely different world should be an enormous thing emotionally, but most collabs never really portray it with the intensity it should actually have. The immediate emotions you'd probably feel in that kind of situation would be fear, curiosity, excitement, dread, something, and not just at a normal level either. These feelings should be amplified several times over. I mean, honestly, I'd probably be more shocked waking up in a completely different country tomorrow, not to mention another world entirely. Yet in most collabs, the characters barely react to it beyond surface level surprise. That's what always makes the whole thing feel so artificial to me. The reactions undersell just how insane the situation actually is, and then we get to the story itself. Most of the time, collabs end up feeling like completely isolated side stories, something disconnected from the actual workings of the world or the progression of the main narrative, and that's where the whole concept starts falling apart for me. Because the entire appeal of a crossover is seeing how these characters interact with a completely different world, different rules, different societies, different people, different conflicts. That's the interesting part. You have characters suddenly thrown into an environment they don't understand, and the whole appeal should come from watching how they adapt to it, how they react to it, and how that world reacts back to them. But we almost never really see that explored to its full potential. Most of the time, it's handled in such a shallow way that the whole thing just ends up feeling cheap. That's the biggest reason I've never really cared much about collabs in the first place. Most of them feel less like actual stories and more like marketing events wearing a story's skin. And the frustrating part is that it doesn't have to be that way. A collab can absolutely be both. It can be marketing while still telling a genuinely interesting story around the concept itself. Most games just don't really try to do that. Now obviously I don't know what kind of limitations exist behind the scenes. I'm sure there are things involving copyright or restrictions from the companies involved. Still, if they're already doing a crossover like this in the first place, I have a hard time believing they can push the storytelling side of it much further than they usually do. And that's exactly why I didn't really have many expectations from the Wuthering Waves Edgerunners collab either. With that said, this collab was always in a better position than most collabs to begin with. They actually share a lot more similarities than I initially expected. At their core, both stories are built around people struggling against worlds that constantly try to crush them. In Edgerunners you have Night City, a world that consumes people, a world where survival itself slowly strips away your humanity, piece by piece until eventually there's almost nothing left. People cling to dreams they know are probably impossible, push themselves beyond their limits, and still keep moving forward anyway. And honestly, Wuthering Waves isn't that far off emotionally. The entire world of Solaris constantly feels like it's on the edge of collapse. Almost every major story arc revolves around sacrifice, burden, survival, or people trying to preserve something in a world that keeps taking things away from them. Even the characters themselves feel surprisingly compatible. When you really think about it, Edgerunners characters are already people who feel disconnected from their own world. Lucy never really felt like she belonged anywhere. David slowly becomes consumed by the expectations placed on him until eventually he can barely even recognize himself anymore. These are characters already struggling with identity, isolation, and survival long before another world even enters the picture. Maybe that's exactly why this collab immediately felt more believable to me than most other usually do. Because these worlds actually feel emotionally compatible with each other. The tone fits, the atmosphere fits, even the emotional weight behind both stories feels strangely similar. Most collabs usually feel like two completely incompatible worlds awkwardly stitched together for the sake of hype, but this actually feels like two stories that could naturally collide with each other without completely breaking immersion. And that's probably the biggest reason the preview caught me off guard so much. Even then, this only creates a good space for an interesting story, but it doesn't mean that it's going to sidestep the issues we talked about. Those were exactly my thoughts on this collab before I watched the preview. Two stories that could come together with amazing synergy and create something genuinely interesting, yet still fall into the exact same collab patterns I've seen so many times before. I genuinely thought Kuro was just gonna bring back the Somme Noir and have the whole story take place inside it, pretty much segregated from the world outside and from the characters themselves. So my expectations for any genuinely good story here were pretty much non-existent. Because at the end of the day, for me, everything always comes back to the story. It doesn't really matter to me what kind of excuses are built around it. People might say, well, it's just a collab. Does it really matter? It's only a side story. And honestly, yeah, I think it does matter. Every argument we make for why a collab doesn't need to have a good story just feels like an excuse to me. There's really nothing stopping them from writing an interesting, cohesive story that still feels like part of the world itself. And that's exactly why I was so surprised after seeing the preview. Almost everything in it seemed to contradict the kind of collabs I've experienced before. Now, don't get me wrong, I haven't experienced that many collabs myself. A lot of you watching this have probably seen way more than I have, and maybe some of you even know genuinely amazing collabs out there. Still, based on my own experience, I really didn't expect much from this. But then I saw the preview, I saw the collab characters actually interacting with Wuthering Waves characters, I saw them interacting with the world itself on a much larger scale than I expected, and I was blown away. This is exactly what I want to see from a collab. I want these worlds to actually feel like they're colliding with each other instead of the whole thing just being isolated in some disconnected side event. Now obviously, I'm still not sure how far they're actually gonna go with this. It was only a brief preview after all. Still, from that short glimpse alone, my expectations were rekindled. This is the first time in a long while that I am genuinely excited for a collab. Well, technically the second time. Let's just say the first one didn't exactly end very well. So hopefully this one ends up being different. Now, even after all of this, my excitement still probably isn't anywhere near the level of the rest of the community. I've seen the reactions online and trust me, I get it. I understand why people are hyped for this, but for me, it still always comes back to the same thing, the story. No matter how cool the concept is, no matter how cool these characters from another franchise are, if the story itself falls short, then the whole thing just won't leave much impact on me at the end of the day. Oh, and before I forget, I just want to mention this briefly. I'm actually really surprised that the free character is one of the female characters. I genuinely expected them to go with a guy instead. Usually that's how these collabs tend to work. Although I already know my wallet is probably not surviving after Hiyuki and Denia, so yeah, I'm actually excited for a collab again. And now my fingers are crossed for it being just as good as they're currently setting it up to be. Honestly, thinking about it now, maybe the reason I never really cared much about collabs wasn't even because of the concept itself, because when you really think about it, the idea behind collabs should be one of the most exciting concepts for a story. You have characters from completely different worlds suddenly colliding with each other, different societies, different rules, different personalities, different ways of seeing the world. That should be fascinating, but most of the time, collabs never really treat that idea with the level of importance it deserves. They just feel like temporary events, and maybe that's why this preview surprised me so much. This actually feels like a collab that wants to embrace the concept itself instead of just using it as an excuse to sell characters. Now obviously we still have to wait and see how good the story itself is actually gonna be. A great preview doesn't automatically mean a great story. Still, This is the first time in a very long while where I looked at a collab and thought, okay, this could actually be something special. And that alone already makes it stand out from most collabs I've seen before. So now I'm curious, what collabs did you guys genuinely enjoy? Not just because the characters were cool, but because the story itself actually surprised you. Honestly, if more collabs were handled like this, I'd probably be excited for them a lot more often.